There is a part of you that has been watching your life long before you had words for your thoughts. It's quiet. It doesn't argue. It doesn't panic. It simply sees. Most people spend their entire lives never realizing this witness exists because the mind is loud, the emotions are loud, and the roles we play in the world are loud. But the part of you that watches all of this is silent. And that silence is older than your personality. If you're new here, stay with me for a moment. I want to take you to a place inside yourself that most people never reach. Because the truth is simple. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. Carl Jung understood this with a clarity few psychologists ever touched. He believed the human mind isn't a single structure, it's a layered system. At the surface is the ego, the part that talks, reacts, explains, defends, compares, worries, and tries to stay in control. But behind the ego there is another presence. A deeper center. A kind of inner awareness that doesn't need words to understand what's true. This is the observer. Some call it the witness. Some call it consciousness itself. Carl Jung called it the self, the psychological core that exists no matter what you achieve, no matter who approves of you, no matter how many times you break, and no matter how many times you begin again. To understand this, remember a moment in your life when something truly shook you. A heartbreak. A humiliation. A moment of loss or betrayal. A moment when everything around you suddenly felt painfully real. If you look closely at that memory, you'll notice something unusual. Part of you was drowning, but part of you was watching. You were crying, but you were also noticing the tears. You were afraid, but you were also aware of the fear. You were overwhelmed, but you were also quietly witnessing it. That silent watcher is the part Carl Jung pointed to, the presence that appears whenever the ego cracks. And that's why even your most painful moments contain a strange kind of stillness inside them. A stillness that doesn't come from comfort, but from truth. Pain wakes the observer because pain breaks the illusion. In everyday life, we lose sight of the observer. We become the role we're performing. We become the image we're protecting. We become the personality that others expect. We talk to ourselves non-stop and we assume the voice is me. But that voice can be insecure, panicked, dramatic, judgmental, and completely ruled by old wounds. The observer is none of those things. The observer watches the noise without becoming the noise. And Carl Jung believed this moment of noticing is the beginning of real awakening, not a mystical awakening, but a psychological one. A shift where you stop drowning in your mind and start seeing the water around you. And once that shift happens, life begins to feel different. Not easier, but clearer. You start seeing how much of your behavior has been shaped by fear and survival. You notice the moment you shrink when someone raises their voice. You notice the moment you perform when someone seems confident. You notice the moment you disappear when someone seems disappointed in you. You notice the mask you wear when you're afraid of being judged. And the moment you notice these things, they lose their power. Observation breaks the spell. We live in a world that teaches performance, perfection, and identity, but not awareness. No one tells you that the part of you watching all of this is the one that's actually alive. Before we continue, if you're finding this helpful or eye-opening, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more reflections like this. It helps the channel grow and it helps these messages reach the people who need them. The ego blocks the observer in ways that are very predictable. It talks constantly, not because it's wise, but because it's terrified of silence. It builds narratives, stories about your worth, stories about what others think, stories about failure, stories about being not enough. The ego confuses identity with survival. It convinces you that you must be liked to be safe, that you must be perfect to be loved, that you must perform to be accepted. But the observer sees the truth beneath all of that. It sees how your voice changes depending on who you're with. It sees how you shrink around those who intimidate you. It sees how you exaggerate confidence to hide insecurity. It sees how you avoid conflict to avoid abandonment. It sees how you chase approval to avoid shame. The observer is like a mirror that refuses to lie. And that's why silence feels uncomfortable. Because silence reveals the truth the ego has been working hard to hide. Carl Jung believed that the moment you notice the observer, a doorway opens, a doorway not into spirituality, but into psychological truth. Because when you step back and watch your thoughts instead of drowning in them, you discover something simple. Your thoughts are not you. Your fears are not you. Your impulses are not you. Your conditioning is not you. The awareness behind them is where your true self begins. This is why, even in your darkest moments, something in you stayed calm for just a breath. Something in you didn't collapse even when your world did. That something is not the ego. It's not the personality you constructed. It's not the wound you've been carrying. It's not the identity you perform. It's the quiet, steady presence inside you that life cannot break. Carl Jung called this the self, the deep psychological center that holds your truth even when the rest of you feels lost. You don't create this self. You uncover it. Slowly. Through awareness. Through honesty. Through observation. The observer appears whenever the ego is overwhelmed and the performance collapses. A heartbreak. A betrayal. A moment of humiliation. A night when you suddenly feel empty in a way you cannot explain. In those moments, you step outside your thoughts and simply watch them move. This isn't dissociation. This is clarity. The difference is simple. Dissociation escapes the moment. Observation witnesses it. And witnessing is the beginning of transformation. Because you start to realize you can feel fear without becoming afraid. You can feel anger without becoming destructive. You can feel sadness without becoming broken. The observer gives you space to respond instead of react, space to breathe instead of collapse, space to tell the truth instead of rushing into another performance. This space is the birthplace of inner freedom. It's the moment you stop saying, "This is just who I am," and start seeing who you've been trained to be. And underneath it all, there is a you that's been watching your whole life. A you that doesn't panic, doesn't compare, doesn't pretend. A you that's honest and unafraid of the truth. A you that doesn't need a story to exist. And if you can feel that, even faintly, you're already closer to yourself than you've ever been. There's a moment in your life when you begin to realize that the observer inside you isn't just a feeling. It's an intelligence. It doesn't speak in words, but it sees with absolute clarity. Carl Jung believed that this quiet intelligence is the closest thing we have to our real self. Because the ego is made of noise, fear, memory, expectations, conditioning. But the observer is made of awareness. It watches your thoughts without taking them personally. It watches your emotions without becoming their prisoner. It watches your patterns without confusing them with identity. And the more you step into this awareness, the more you begin to see just how much of your life has been lived unconsciously. Not because you were weak. Not because you were unaware. But because you were surviving. Think about how often you react before thinking, raising your voice, shutting down, pulling away, over-explaining, people-pleasing, withdrawing into silence, or performing strength you don't feel. These reflexes aren't you. They're old adaptations. Leftover scripts from childhood, from painful experiences, from moments when you needed protection more than you needed truth. The observer sees all of this with compassion, not judgment. Because the observer knows you did the best you could with the awareness you had. Carl Jung said that growth begins the moment we become curious about the parts of ourselves we don't understand. That curiosity is the voice of the observer. It's the part of you that asks deeper questions. Why do I react like this? Who taught me to shrink here? Why do I fear being seen? Why do certain people feel unsafe, even when they're kind? Why do I perform for approval that never satisfies me? These questions don't come from the ego. The ego defends itself. The observer investigates. And investigation is how you slowly dismantle the identity you built for survival. Most people believe they are their personality. But personality is simply the mask that helped you function in a world that didn't always understand you. Carl Jung believed that underneath this mask is a much deeper, truer self waiting to be revealed. But that self doesn't shout. It waits. Quietly. Patiently. until you're ready to notice it. And the moment you notice, something profound begins. You start feeling a small, steady distance between you and your reactions. The annoyance comes, but you observe it. The insecurity comes, but you watch it rise and fall. The fear comes, but you feel it without drowning in it. This is not detachment. This is awareness. And awareness doesn't weaken you, it frees you. Because once you can observe a thought, you no longer believe it blindly. Once you can observe an emotion, you no longer become it. Once you can observe a behavior, you no longer feel trapped inside it. This subtle inner shift is where Carl Jung located the beginning of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are beneath the layers of expectation. And that's why your inner observer matters. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. You cannot heal what you refuse to witness. You cannot become whole while living inside an illusion. The observer is the part of you that brings light to the places inside you that have been operating in darkness. And once the light enters, something remarkable happens. Your shadow begins to reveal itself. Not the dark, dramatic shadow that movies romanticize, but the everyday shadow, the insecurities you hide, the roles you cling to, the patterns you repeat, the fears you pretend you don't feel. Carl Jung believed that the shadow isn't dangerous when it's seen. It's dangerous when it's ignored. Because whatever you refuse to observe will control you from the dark. If you refuse to see your insecurity, it will shape your relationships. If you refuse to see your anger, it will leak out as resentment. If you refuse to see your fear, it will silently dictate your decisions. If you refuse to see your longing, it will choose for you in ways you don't understand. Awareness doesn't erase these things, it reveals them. And revelation is the first step toward responsibility. When you watch yourself honestly, you stop blaming others for the reactions you don't understand. You stop projecting your wounds onto people who didn't create them. You stop chasing validation from people who can't give it. You stop clinging to identities that were never yours. You begin to stand in the simple truth of who you are. Not who you were trained to be. Not who you were expected to be. Not who you forced yourself to become. But the you that has been watching your entire life unfold. A quiet self. A steady self. A self that does not panic when your world changes. A self that is not threatened by honesty. A self that is not afraid of the truth. And as this observer grows stronger, something else begins to shift. Your reactions slow down. Your perception sharpens. Your choices feel more deliberate. Your life becomes more intentional. You become less controlled by what others think. You become less overwhelmed by your own emotions. You become less interested in performing a version of yourself that no longer feels true. You begin to sense that the observer is guiding you. Not with commands, not with pressure, but with clarity. Clarity that says, this doesn't feel right. Clarity that says, this isn't who I am anymore. Clarity that says, this situation is draining my soul. Clarity that says, I don't need to prove myself here. Clarity that says, I'm allowed to choose differently now. This clarity is quiet, but it's powerful. Because the observer doesn't speak from fear. It speaks from truth. And truth is always simple. Most people think awakening is dramatic, that it happens suddenly, like a lightning strike. But for most people, awakening begins quietly. It begins the first time you watch yourself react and realize you have a choice. It begins the first time you see your pattern and refuse to repeat it. The first time you feel the impulse to please and choose honesty instead. The first time you feel the old wound activate and breathe instead of panic. Awakening doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with observation. And as this inner observer strengthens, you start to see something profound. You were never broken. Just unconscious. Just overwhelmed. Just trying to survive in ways that made sense at the time. And the moment you begin to observe, you stop surviving and begin living. Because then, the one who has been watching all along finally steps forward to meet you. The part of you that is calm when the mind is loud. The part of you that is steady when emotions surge. The part of you that is honest when the ego wants to hide. The part of you that is whole even when life feels shattered. This is the you that Carl Jung wanted people to discover, the inner observer, the quiet self, the center of awareness that has been with you from the beginning. And the more you trust it, the more life starts to make sense. Not because the world becomes easier, but because you finally see yourself clearly. And that clarity is the beginning of real freedom. If this message spoke to you, like the video and stay with me for more reflections like this. Thank you for being here with me. Take care of your heart. And may love always guide your path.